The food business exists because our founder, Yvon Chouinard, years ago, really started to understand the impact of food on the ability for the earth to sustain human life, and how, if we're going to solve the climate and environmental crises, we have to solve the problems of the food system. So if you have farm salmon on your menu, you're buying from open net pen salmon farms, almost certainly, if it's at any scale. We think that, like in transportation, in the built environment, in energy, we have to have a call to eliminate fossil fuels from this system, from this segment of the economy as well. The greatest use of that corn in the US is ethanol. So we're growing corn with natural gas and then putting it into our cars. It is just a waste of resources, and we subsidize it with taxpayer dollars. When we make our personal food choices, I really want people to start thinking more about if they're buying fossil foods. Organic is a good proxy for that, right? Because organic prohibits synthetic fertilizer, but they should think about the why, and they should ask questions of their food retailers and their food manufacturers. Like, what is this food made from? And if it doesn't talk about natural sources of fertility, and I mean real ones, not the greenwashing ones, we shouldn't eat it. And if that means paying more or eating different things, we should pay more and eat different things because humanity rests upon it.
Welcome to Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Miller, your host. So excited for our guest on the show today. We have Paul Lighfoot. He leads the food and beverage business at Patagonia Provisions, as well as being the board chair of the Regenerative Organic Alliance. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here.
So tell us about Patagonia Provisions, just to level set, first of all. I know a lot of people, Patagonia is a huge company, and tell us the area that you're involved in.
Yeah, so the purpose of Patagonia is we are in business to save our home planet. So the entire company has that purpose. All of our dividends go into a purpose trust whose purpose is to fight the environmental crises. So we all think about sort of being in the fight to save the earth. The food business exists because our founder, Yvon Chouinard, years ago, really started to understand the impact of food on the ability for the earth to sustain human life, and how, if we're going to solve the climate and environmental crises, we have to solve the problems of the food system. But unlike apparel, which you don't buy very often, you buy food at least 3 times a day generally. And unlike apparel and almost all of the product industries, food can be grown in a way that not only doesn't make things worse, but that can make things better. That can draw down carbon, that can improve water cycles, that can improve and enable biodiversity. And so we thought, if we were honest about really being in the fight for our mission, we had to be in the food business, and that's why we're here.
That's really exciting. I know you also still focus on a lot of your key clientele who, like me, are outdoor enthusiasts, and we're looking for solutions to those issues as well. We're often gone for hours or days, and we need provisions that are going to sustain us.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Nutritionally, I know that's a big focus as well.
Yeah, we actually sort of have 3 pillars of our brand: best taste, best nutrition, best environmental impact. And we feel like we can't succeed without all 3 of those. It's not 2 out of 3, it's 3 out of the 3. And if it's not the highest quality, which in our case is really taste and nutrition, then it doesn't matter what the financials are, what the environmental impact is. It has to be the best product for the use case, which in our case is often thinking about outdoor enthusiasts.
Well, and I can say from personal experience, you've got the taste nailed. So
Thank you.
for those in our audience who haven't tried some of your products, they need to seek them out. They are really good. But let's talk about some of the sourcing, because I know that's what part of your mission is, being very concerned and considerate of our environment and how you're sourcing some of the raw materials that you use in your food products.
Yeah, and I'll zoom out. It's really well understood that for the earth to sustain humanity, you have to have healthy soils and healthy oceans. The oceans are a sink for about a quarter of the greenhouse gas emissions caused by humans, right? So if the ocean wasn't absorbing that carbon, we would already be burned up, essentially, right? And for the ocean to fill that role and to regulate temperatures and to beget the water cycles, it has to have the right amount of healthy life in it. And right now we are destroying the life in the oceans. Similarly, soil is a huge carbon sink as well, and is also required for water cycles and for biodiversity. And if we don't have biodiversity, if we don't have water cycles, if we don't have life in soil, we're not going to be able to survive as humans, right? And so we think very clearly about our sourcing practices that will enable healthy life in both oceans and soil. And we're basically trying to create alternatives to food products that we think are doing the opposite.
Wow. Okay. That is zooming out. And those are some of the really macro situations that are existing today. How do you approach your business to try to minimize your
Yeah.
negative impact and maybe even have a positive impact?
Yeah, well, I'll just give a really specific example. And it's an example that I'm excited about because of an article that came out last week in the journal Science. So the sort of most respected peer-reviewed academic journal just released an article that sort of put an end to any tenable discussion that there's a debate that open net pen salmon farms are disastrous. So it's been well understood for people that don't have a bias that they are disastrous. And Science just sort of wrote the definitive article last week, sort of
And
putting into the debate.
can we just take a pause there for some of our audience who might not know what that
Yeah.
means? What is that before you move forward to share?
The world no longer has commercial fisheries available for Atlantic salmon. It doesn't exist. We destroyed it. There is, however, a ton of Atlantic salmon to be found on restaurant menus and in supermarkets, particularly in the United States. All of that salmon is farmed. Many of that salmon will have on it labels of it being farmed sustainably or in an earth-friendly way or an ocean-friendly way, and it isn't true. It is theoretically possible that you could have farms that farm salmon in a way that was friendly to the ocean, but it doesn't exist in any commercial scale today. So if you have farm salmon on your menu, you're buying from open net pen salmon farms, almost certainly if it's in any scale. Open net pen salmon farms are sort of what the words sound like. They're big, giant nets in the ocean that are like farms in which the salmon are raised. And there's really three detrimental effects of these farms. The first and the one that's most easily understood is the pollution. Farming salmon intensively like that just destroys the marine ecosystems around it from the pollution coming from the farm itself. The second is the escapees who get out into rivers nearby and destroy the genetic stability of the native salmon populations. And the third, which is the least understood, but I think the most important one, is that these salmon farms are feeding their salmon wild caught fish. And it's the bait fish. It's like anchovies, sardines, herring, and mackerel. And there's a feed conversion ratio. You start off with X amount of bait fish, and the salmon ends up giving you much less than X amount of food to feed humans. Um, they are the salmon farms indirectly are causing vast loss of the ocean to just be raped of these fish, and it's destabilizing ocean populations. And these the lower on the food chain fish are really great for the oceans. Lots of fish feed on them. They're resilient. They bounce back quickly. And by taking them out, we're really messing with the oceans. So those are some of the main reasons why we need to ban open net pen salmon farms. And I think U.S. food retailers should end the practice. And I'm hoping that this article from Science last week will help convince them to do so.
Okay. Well, you know what? We will put a link to that article in our show notes so that people can
Oh,
reference.
great. And let me add one more thing about this. Like we our love for salmon at Patagonia goes back decades, right? Salmon is it's not an apex predator, but it's what we call I mean, yeah, it's not an apex predator. It's a keystone species in that it's super important to ecology and habitats all over the world. On the west coast of the United States, like in the Pacific Northwest, historically, salmon would swim hundreds of miles inland, bringing nutrients from the ocean. They'd be eaten by bears. The bears would defecate in the woods. Like you would have ocean nutrients in these habitats, and when they go away, it's really damaging for these habitats. We decided to get into seafood to show that are alternatives to these practices. So we are selling anchovies, mackerel, sardines and it's like the healthiest protein you can get. It's the right kind of fats. It's the right kind of omega 3 to omega 6 ratios. It is delicious. It is healthy, and there is more of it available when you eat the bait fish itself instead of the salmon from the salmon farms.
Right. And we don't end up with that net negative that you were talking about by feeding those fish to the salmon.
Exactly right.
Lose out. Yeah, we lose out there. Well,
And
thanks.
that's our seafood business. We're trying to provide an alternative to the salmon farming industry, which we think
Yeah.
needs to be ended.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, and there's some other sourcing more on land, not in the
Yeah.
ocean, that you also want to talk about.
Yeah. So, and if it's okay, I'll start by zooming out again.
Yes, please.
I would say that about a third of humanity's greenhouse gas emissions are from the food and agriculture industry. And in the United States, I think the largest source of emissions in food and agriculture is from synthetic fertilizer. So synthetic fertilizer, and I wish everybody understood this, synthetic fertilizer is made from natural gas. Like, so when you are growing food with synthetic fertilizer, you are growing food with fossil fuels. I call it a fossil food, right? So there's a massive fossil food industry in the United States, and it makes all sorts of claims about sustainability and about, being natural and being climate smart. But if it's being made from natural gas, it's a fossil food, and there's no amount of sort of dancing around that, right? Um, we think that, like in transportation, in the built environment, in energy, we have to have a call to eliminate fossil fuels from this system, from this segment of the economy as well. The progressive energy people aren't saying, let's make less fossil fuel electricity in the future. They're saying, let's make renewable, non-fossil fuel energy in the future. And we need to do the same thing with food as well. And so there is a really well understood set of natural sources of fertility that make it so you don't need to use synthetic fertilizers made from natural gas, right? Regenerative organic certified is a standard that lays out these set of practices. And it's things like crop rotations, minimal tillage, integrating animals, composting, mulching, and the prohibition of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. And when you grow with those set of practices, what we call regenerative organic practices, you're basically bringing in the natural sources of fertility that lead to healthy crops. And it draws down carbon from the atmosphere. It improves biodiversity around it, improves waterways around it, and it makes the food much more nutritious. It turns out when you take the life out of the soil, which is what synthetic fertilizer does, you take out the nutrients out of the soil. There's less nutrients available for the plants to take inside of them to feed to humans. So you've never seen like a win-win-win-win-win-win set of improvements. But the fossil food company, has a vested interest in continuing to do business as they've been doing, and so it's incumbent upon the citizens of the United States to choose the foods that are good for the environment and better for their health, and to force our lawmakers to sort of end this subsidy system that's entrapping farmers into the fossil food system.
Yeah, and for our regular audience, we have covered regenerative agriculture several times, several different angles, and I'm excited to bring in this view of it. And I guess my question is, I as a consumer, how do I know what would I look for to know
Yeah,
that I'm making a good choice? Or if I wanted to support,
yeah,
is it a certification I'm looking
yeah.
for on my food?
And so I will answer the question about certifications, but I'll start with the sort of stuff behind certifications, right? Certifications are like a proxy so that you can make a decision quickly that you can trust, right? But the stuff behind it is what matters, right? So if, and I'll be direct here, like Nestle, Unilever, Cargill, and ADM have all used the phrase regenerative agriculture in their supply chains in cases where it's fossil foods, where it's synthetic fertilizer based ingredients in foods. And by the way, the plain definition of the word regenerative, if you ask the dictionary or ChatGPT, it sort of has two ideas. And one is that it brings life into something, and the second is that it would keep going by itself forever. And clearly, something made out of natural gas is neither, right? Like it's not building life in soil, and it's not going to go on forever. It's dead dinosaurs being dug up and burned and releasing carbon, right? So those claims, in my opinion, are false claims. I mean, it's it's the new word sustainable for those food companies and the same practices. So you would be well served as a human to not support those foods. Now, how do you know? That's why Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's and the Rodale Institute in 2017 stood up the nonprofit, the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which administers a certification, ROC, Regenerative Organic Certified. It is the certification that I trust. And by the way, lots of organic foods are this already. And the O, the middle name of ROC is organic, right? So it is organic plus some other standards on top of it. But basically, that's what I rely on. And in my home, seafood can't be ROC. There's no organic certification. But I try to buy foods that I believe are low on the food chain in seafood, um, uh, aquaculture shellfish like mussels and oysters in seafood, and then nothing else unless it's like line caught locally to me. And then in for terrestrial foods, I try to stick to foods made from regenerative organic certified ingredients,
Okay.
which is
Thank
also what
you.
our business is, by the way, right? So I've got photos or images back here. We've got pasta, we've got crackers made from regenerative organic certified wheat, and we're making beer now as well from regenerative organic certified um, wheatgrass. It's like a cousin of wheat called Kernza, which is not only regenerative, but it's a perennial. So it stays in the ground for several years. It doesn't have to be sort of plowed up and planted every year. And it is on the farm, carbon net negative, and produces beautiful food. And those are the kind of things that we're looking to do.
Very nice. I did see that on your social media and was going to try that. I'm a beer lover, so that I think that would be a great product to try. And
Yeah, and we actually have an NA version of this now, and it just won a big award at the big annual craft beer festival last weekend. So we're really filled with
yeah,
energy right now. It's
and
delicious.
fulfilling your mission. I mean, in everything that you do, like you said, it's all considering the mission that you're out to fulfill through everything you do. So that's exciting. Well, thank you also for explaining. There's a lot of discussion because the whole regenerative agriculture, and if you take the organic piece out of that, that's not the same picture. It kind of goes together, like you were saying, self-sustaining and being able to be on its own by the dictionary. Love that you added Chat GPT in there
Yeah.
as
I
a
mean,
source.
I'll double down on what I said. I think that if you're calling food made from natural gas regenerative, you are a greenwashing, green scamming organization.
Okay. Well, yeah, you're just laying it out there, Paul, from your perspective, and I appreciate that because consumers are concerned about what the terminology is and what to believe, and whether companies are just saying they're walking the walk, but not actually doing that. So,
Yeah, and consumers should be concerned, right? I mean, if we keep growing food the way we grow it today, we won't be able to grow food in 40 years. Like
yeah.
we are pushing the Earth's boundaries, and we need to stop doing that. Luckily, we understand the solution. It doesn't require some new technology.
Yeah. And there are some ways to do that you brought up here today. So that's very exciting. Well, what else is happening at Patagonia Provisions or the Regenerative Organic Alliance that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, maybe I'll start with the Regenerative Organic Alliance. I mentioned earlier that we stood up that nonprofit in 2017. I think the standard was released in 2018, and then took a couple of years for it to really start getting traction in the marketplace. But the good news, right now is that it's growing explosively. So it's, Spins, which tracks syndicated data of, at the checkout at supermarkets, lets us know that ROC is the fastest growing on package claim related to sustainability in the country right now. And we just see the numbers of farms exploding, the numbers of brands exploding. The brands that are selling ROC food have pricing power. Their customers are less price sensitive. They're achieving really strong demand and growth. So it feels like this is the tiger by the tail situation a little bit. So we are super excited about that. And what's coming next is like still a little bit early. So this is a sneak preview. But we described earlier how it is intuitive that when you have healthy life in soil, like the microbiome of soil is strong, you'll have healthier food for humans. And part of why that's intuitive is that we know that the nutrition of food has been plummeting for the last several decades, exactly as the same time that the synthetic fertilizer use has been ascendant, right? So it is, in my mind, certain that when we replace synthetic fertilizer with natural sources of fertility and beget life in soil, we'll have healthier food for humans. We are about to get the data sets that prove it. And there's a
Okay.
great nonprofit run by a guy named Dan Kittredge in New England. I think it's the Bionutrient Association. And then there's a great for-profit venture-backed startup in which Patagonia invested, we believe so much in it, called Edacious, that are both building these data sets to show the connection between soil health and nutrition levels for humans. And when we've got, making claims on packaging and food is very highly regulated. You have to be very, very careful with it. We are very conservative with all claims at Patagonia, but we think in a couple of years we'll be able to make claims about the nutrition levels of food grown in healthier soils. And we think it's going to be a game-changing factor for, imagine mothers choosing which foods to buy for their children. Do I want the one with shit nutrition or the one with fabulous nutrition? We think they're going to consistently choose the one with better nutrition, and they're going to be willing to pay more for it. So we're pretty pumped up about that.
Yeah. And we want to help educate our farmers too on how to farm in these methodologies that do help with the nutrition and of the health of the soil and
Yeah.
put some of that back. So we want to keep our
Yeah.
farmers farming, right?
I actually think that most farmers understand that. Like, farmers are not the problem in this equation. When you spend time with farmers, like, they are consistently the ones that care the most about their land, their soil, their workers. I mean, their workers are often themselves and their family members, right? They are in a system administered by the USDA that's sort of dictated by the Farm Bill from Congress, which is a little bit captured by the fossil food industry, that pretty much entraps farmers into growing synthetic fertilizer-based grains. I mean, it's such a crazy system in the US, but we grow more corn than anything else. And the greatest use of that corn in the US is ethanol. So we're growing corn with natural gas and then putting it into our cars. It is just a waste of resources, and we subsidize it with taxpayer dollars. So it's a giveaway of taxpayer dollars to the ethanol industry in a way that's polluting our waterways and sort of dooming humanity's future. It is one of the worst policies imaginable. Most of the rest of the corn and 70% of the soy is used to feed animals that are grown in industrial circumstances, which is also a crazy misuse of our resources. And I mean, I'll be very specific. I was on the Colorado River a few weeks ago on a trip, and it helped me remember something I learned, I think, in a series about water in the New York Times last summer. 55% of the Colorado River's water ends up being allocated one way or another to the cattle industry. Most of it is the feed for cattle, right? But the CAFOs themselves also. And we've got this amazing water crisis where 7 states rely on the water from the Colorado, and there's not enough, so they're fighting over it. We're using it in super bad ways, and that industrial meat is it's causing the climate crisis. It's making people sick. It's just all bad. And when we solve for this, we have a lot of resources available. We have water. If we grew beans instead of alfalfa for cattle, we'd have so much more food because the feed conversion ratio from grains to cows is like 19 to 1 or something. It's terrible, right? If you just grew food, you'd have so much more of it. So I'm actually quite optimistic about how much better the world will be when we wake up to these challenges and solve them.
Yeah, and I think to your point, the education is getting out there, the awareness is out there, and the conversations are happening, and that's actually the most important thing, so that then you can define good options and make some good decisions, right, moving forward.
Yeah.
So that's part of what we wanted to do today in talking to you is bring some of these thoughts to the forefront, give our audience some things to think about and some ways to get involved or make an impact themselves.
So when
What
I think about when people ask me what they should do, I have a surprising answer and a very specific one, which is which is one that I really like too. If the nation's schools were a restaurant chain, it would be by far the largest restaurant chain in the United States. And the thing about schools is that it's the most controllable by local people part of our government. So, schools are governments, local governments, but there's generally a school board that almost anyone can get on with a little bit of effort in their town or their county. And it is remarkable how much influence you can have on it. If you show up at 3 meetings in a row with 6 thoughtful, passionate parents, there's almost nothing that you can't get. And Alice Waters, who penned the quote that I love the most, which is that food is the only climate solution that's delicious, which I love. She talks a lot about how schools can be demand magnets for local regenerative organic agriculture. And we're seeing this in Vacaville, between San Francisco and in Sacramento. There's a terrific school food leader there, a guy named Juan. I can't remember his last name. There's a farmer named Anna Knight in Southern California who supplies citrus to LA schools that's regeneratively grown. But there's all these cases now where you're seeing school districts doing scratch cooking, cutting out the sort of processed food middleman and buying food locally. And when that happens, it transforms local food communities. They don't have to sell to Cargill. They don't have to sell to US Foods. They can capture like 40% of the purchase price instead of what now is often like 5% of the purchase price, right? So they can sell their food at high enough prices to justify their thoughtful practices, which are often more expensive. So I tell people, get on your local school boards or influence your local school boards and convince them of the benefits of buying food locally, which in many cases kids get to talk about. I've got a kid he's a food intern at his school, right? Like they talk about the business of the food system. They talk about the ecological benefits of local regenerative organic food. They talk about, the fact that farm workers live in their communities and need to be treated humanely. It's really a wonderful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
And
Well,
then
go
Well,
ahead.
and then the other thing I talk about is just like the insaneness of our farm bill, which I gave the example earlier of how forget food, we're misusing our farmland by turning them into petrochemical operations to fuel cars. Like it doesn't make any sense. We just need to shut that down. So people need to vote in a way that opposes the current structure of the farm bill because it is a special interest giveaway that is opposed to the welfare of Americans.
Yeah, and you are right. I would not have guessed your answer to that question.
Yeah,
However, I mean, getting involved locally with what happens in your own community is a great place to start, Paul. I
yeah.
think that's a great piece of advice because for those who have children as well, I mean, it directly impacts you and your community. So that's really a great piece of advice. I
Well,
appreciate
and most parents would be shocked if they walked into an average school and saw the crap the kids are being fed. I mean, if you ate that way at lunch, you'd have a hard time concentrating the afternoon because you're eating all of this like synthetic, chemical laden processed food. It does not make you feel good. And it's hard for 10-year-olds to recognize that feeling. I recognize it in myself now. If I eat something at lunch that isn't supernatural or the wrong kind of stuff, I just don't feel good in the afternoon. That's how
it.
most of our kids in America are going every day.
Yeah.
I want to add
Good.
one more answer to your question because
Oh,
the
well, please.
good things happen in threes sometimes.
Okay.
When we make our personal food choices, I really want people to start thinking more about if they're buying fossil foods. Organic is a good proxy for that, right? Because organic prohibits synthetic fertilizer, but they should think about the why and they should ask questions of their food retailers and their food manufacturers. Like, what is this food made from? And if it doesn't talk about natural sources of fertility, and I mean real ones, not the greenwashing ones, we shouldn't eat it. And if that means paying more or eating different things, we should pay more and eat different things because humanity rests upon it.
Okay. Thank you for giving us some tangible, actionable insights that we can take moving forward. That is a big part of what we like to do here at Future Foodcast. And we have talked about the Regenerative Organic Alliance before, and I'm excited to add your flair into that and the definitions, et cetera. Does the Regenerative Organic Alliance, just question, have a list of the organizations that are a part of them?
Yes.
Okay.
I think the website is regenerativeorganic.org.
So we
But if
can,
you just Google Regenerative Organic Alliance, you'll find it. And there is a database of brands and farms on it, which, as I
great.
said, is growing by leaps and bounds. It's really heartening.
Well, that's exciting, Paul. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well for
Great.
our listeners who would like to take a look at that. But I thank you for bringing your perspective to us today and helping to spread the word and the education from your viewpoint and what you see happening in the world.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thanks for being with us. If you enjoyed this interview with Paul and would like to see more, drop us a comment. Please subscribe so you don't miss our next show. Until then, I'm Pam Line-Miller.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.